Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm glad that you're all here today. This is brought to you by TLC Services, and TLC stands for Transition Life Consultants, and I'm one of them. I'm a volunteer for TLC. We do training, such as facilitator training for group leaders. We do support groups, such as for caregivers, grief, weight loss. We do presentations such as this one for CEUs and other presentations for clients. And we do one-on-one counseling. And we're still doing one-on-one counseling even during COVID, although we're doing mostly by telephone and video calls, maybe some meetings in the park, depending on the situation between the therapist and the client. So I am a licensed clinical social worker, and my passion really is helping those who help others. I spent 25 years working for the VA as an employee, and then another 15 years helping them as a consultant. And I understand that working in large, mature organizations has challenges. Sometimes we can feel like we don't really have control over our work processes. But I have learned that we have more control than we realize when we take a closer look. And I've been interested in this topic of self-care for healthcare workers, mental health professionals, people who work in the field of our professions for quite some time, really over 20 years, maybe 30 years now. Especially when I started working at the VA, I saw lots of dedicated people who loved helping patients, loved helping veterans. Sometimes they were frustrated because they couldn't get around all the rules to really help someone. And sometimes they weren't really taking care of themselves very well. They were focusing more on helping all the people that were there that needed help. And one of the most striking examples of that is one time I was walking into work with my umbrella. It rains a lot in Seattle where I was. And the CEO, who was the director of the hospital and also my immediate supervisor, was also coming in with his umbrella. And we looked to the right as we were entering the door, and there, standing outside in the rain, was the head cardiac surgeon smoking a cigarette. And so we looked back at each other, and it kind of started something there. We had an aha moment where we felt we needed to really look at the culture of the organization. And we might have been doing lots of things for veterans to help them and stay fit, and it was supposed to be a place of healing, but we really weren't helping the employees that much. So we started some programs to change that. And I made some personal decisions at that time. I decided I was going to hang out with people who really wanted to take a walk at lunch instead of just sitting at my desk and having a sack lunch in 10 minutes. And I just started paying more attention to what I needed to keep myself healthy. So this has become more of a focus, self-care, since I'd say about 2008, 2014, somewhere in that time frame. And many of the programs, at least in social work that I've looked at, include self-care in the program. And they also include it in supervision, so that people are being asked, how are you taking care of yourself? And how are you processing some of the things that you're seeing and you're witnessing? And then, of course, the pandemic now has put, I think, an even greater focus on this because, with growing uncertainty and feeling we can't really help others as much as we would like to, even though there's more need. And if you're a frontline worker, you might have added worries. Maybe you feel worried that you might take home the virus to your family. Or if you're someone who's retired, you might worry about bringing home the virus to someone in your household who's in maybe higher risk than you are. So these things have all brought about a lot more stress and making the topic even more pertinent. So our objectives today, first I'd like to talk about why it's important to take care of yourself. So I just was mentioning that as providers of mental health care, we all tend to think more about taking care of others than ourselves. So we'll take a look at that, and also the ethics and sustainability of self-care. It's not just a one-shot thing, it's an ongoing thing we have to keep reminding ourselves about. And I'm aware while I'm talking about this that some of you might be working, some of you might not be, so I'm trying to give you some examples that go both ways to help you relate to what it is that I'm talking about. And the second one, identifying choices. We have a lot of choices. So for example, we can say, what is my role here? Do I need to rush in and help? Do I need to slow down and figure things out so that I'm being the most effective helper I can be? So we can get in trouble if we feel like, this is really a thing now, it's called a need complex. If we feel like we're so indispensable and people need us so much that we really can't stop working, and we can't even take time out to take a break or to let ourselves have some time to ourselves. So then on the third one, I'll talk about some practical tools that will help you triage and help you problem solve and prioritize your energies. We all, I think, understand in this field the importance of reframing and problem solving. Sometimes just changing our perception is really the important thing. So some of the things that I'll talk to you about today have to do with tools for doing that for yourself. So if we start with ourselves, then we're going to be better with others too. We're going to have more energy and be more prepared to help other people. And then the fourth objective, strategies are important, because if everything's important, really nothing is important. So we can scatter ourselves too much and dilute our ability to accomplish goals. Why not use strategies in our own lives? I think we're all used to the idea of having a strategic plan, maybe for an organization or for a team, but what about for ourselves? We can actually do that for ourselves. So, and I think there's a bonus here within this group, this club, and within our TLCs, we can really support ourselves and each other. We can give each other peer support. So I think it's an opportunity. And as we go along today, I will point out some of the ways I think that that could work. So here's the agenda. And I think you'll see that there are tools you could use with clients. I'm hoping today, though, that you'll concentrate on yourself and then treat yourself as if you would a client or as if you would a trusted friend or family member, and use your mind and your heart to make the tools work for you. There's a social worker in New York named Abigail Johnson, and she says, we spend all day filling our cup with others' emotions and ailments, and we need to pour it out somewhere. So that's kind of the premise of some of these things. These are some of the outcomes we all want to avoid: work stress, anxiety, secondary trauma, burnout, physical problems. So to avoid these outcomes, we need to find ways to incorporate self-care into our daily work. We don't want to have a crisis response. And we might have clues that things are happening, and we can watch for those clues. You might not be as far as emotional exhaustion, but you might be stressed, and you could notice it if you think about it. So one of our colleagues, and not mentioning names, but told me that he had an incident lately. Now, I think this is where he probably realized that I'm acting out of character, so I must be pretty stressed. He was in a grocery store, he had his dog with him in a little stroller, and was minding his own business, and he was following the rules. When he entered the store, he found out that was okay to have the dog with him. And this was early on when the grocery stores were first trying to figure out how they were going to handle everything. And a man just came over, angry, right into his face and said, you should not have this dog in the grocery store. So he was so taken aback, and he's someone who would normally respond not at all in an aggressive way or in an angry way, but he found himself saying, "Do you want to go out in the parking lot and settle this?" So that's a clue to him that he was under stress. I actually had a similar thing happen. I was in the Starbucks, and it was the first time I had gone in any place when masks were required, and when I was just deciding that it was okay to do something like that. I walked in, but I didn't read the sign on the door well enough, and I came in the wrong door. So they kind of jumped on me about coming in the wrong door. And I found myself getting really upset with them. And that was out of character for me. So I knew after that experience that I was, my overreaction showed me that I was under stress. Maybe not to the extent of having physical problems, but still to a degree. So compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, those things, in compassion fatigue, you can be numb and actually lose your ability to empathize with others just because you've listened over and over to some of the similar problems. Vicarious trauma is an accumulation of exposure to others' pain. And you know, we have mirror neurons, and it's almost as if we're experiencing it ourselves when we hear traumatic situations. So we need to think about, how do we process what we're seeing or witnessing in our jobs or in our lives? We know in our profession, we know the value of a good listener, and we could get peer support perhaps from each other or from another person within our group or the people that we know. I'll also bring up journaling a few times in this talk because it has a really high value as far as helping you process something in case you don't have someone you can talk to. If you write it out to yourself, sometimes that's a really good way to process. Remember the tragedy of the New York ER doctor, Dr. Breen, who committed suicide in April. You have to wonder if she really had anybody to talk to. Was she telling anybody her experiences? And that's the situation. We don't want it to get that far. We need to ask ourselves, now, just because we're people who know how to help others process mental health problems, that doesn't mean we'll never need it ourselves. So sometimes we need to just stop and think, what mental health help do I have available? And when I see these clues, if it's not enough to help us have a friend listen or to talk it over, then where can I get to help? An important thing to consider. These terms are sometimes used interchangeably, stress and burnout, but really they're different. With stress, there's too much. We're out of control. It's over-engagement. We're drowning in responsibilities. It's more anxiety provoking, and it's also like overactive emotions. It's primarily physical, whereas burnout is more emotional and is more about not enough or depletion. Sometimes repeated stress can lead to the burnout where we're just feeling so depleted and even depressed. So you might ask yourself, and maybe not to the degree of these, but do you tend maybe one way more than another? Maybe you're more anxiety. Anxiety might be more of a problem for you than depression. But it might give you some clues when you're working on a self-care strategy later, if you know whether you might tend one way or the other. Here's some examples of impaired competence. So in the first example, there was a CPS caseworker, and she had growing concerns about some of the things that were going on in her caseload and at work. And so there were some clues, but nobody really picked up on it in time. She was moody, she was distracted, forgetful. Finally, she went on sick leave and she tuned into the local evening news, and they were doing a special report on incompetent social workers. The subject of the investigation was she herself. So that was really a shock, and no one wants something to go that far. In the second example, this is more of a study of psychologists, and so the psychologists, 75% of them acknowledged that they had distress within a 3-year period, but only 36% of them thought there was any adverse impact on the quality of care. So that kind of points out that we can have blinders and not really notice. We might think, oh yes, I'm stressed, but it's not affecting my work, but it could be affecting our work. And then in the last study here, it's mental health clinicians. And 60% of them said that they worked when they were too distressed to be effective. And 85% of them said, yes, that's unethical. But less than 5% acknowledged that the care was inadequate as a result. So again, it's just easy to have blinders. So it's not a sign of weakness to practice self-care. It's a sign of strength, and it's a sign of wisdom to tap into your inner resources and know when you might need help. And it's also ethical because we need to protect ourselves and our clients. We need to protect our clients from ourselves if we might be getting into that kind of a situation. These are work environment conditions most likely to lead to stress. Now, there will be another slide about burnout. When you look at this list, you might say, well, I can't really affect most of the things on this list. The way the tasks are designed, management style, but the one that's in bold, I think you probably have the most effect on, and that's the relationships in the workplace and negativity. The work roles and goals, when I did my consulting work and when I was internal at the VA also, the roles and goals were really the #1 thing that we worked on, because when roles are clear, and that takes work to make them clear, and the goals are clear and people are talking about them and they're being advocated for, then that's when things can go better. So what can you do when you don't have control? You can be proactive. You can keep a record of some of the problems. And I don't know if you've heard of managing up. Sometimes if you're not the boss, but you have a manager, managing up is where you help the manager look good. And one of the ways you do that is by keeping track of some of the things that are going wrong and coming up with some ideas that maybe it could be changed. So it's kind of hard for that manager to ignore you if you're not just coming to complain, but you have some ideas. And those ideas are going to help make the whole operation better. There's also an article I really like by the Mayo Clinic staff, and they talk about the 4 A's, and they're avoid, alter, adapt, and accept. So the avoid and alter are you change the situation. Adapt and accept are where you reframe the way you're looking at the situation. And that's really, really good thing to know. And I think Elaine is here today. It's cognitive behavioral therapy, really. It's similar to that. And I can make that article available for people if you're interested. These are work environment conditions that lead to burnout more than stress. Now, it's kind of interesting because work environment could be stressful or it could be not challenging enough. And that can lead people to burnout because they just don't have much to care about. The #1 people that are at risk of being burned out are caregivers. I think we all kind of sense this from the work we do with caregivers. They easily become cynical about their work because it can be unending, and they really have a hard time paying attention to themselves. The second at-risk group is physicians. The third is politicians. Physicians, it's more because they make life or death decisions a lot of the time, and it's kind of a burden over time. Politicians are always working under public scrutiny. And then next would be managers and team leaders. And here's another surprising one. Millennials, that whole generation, those born between 1981 and 1996. They have a lot of pressure on how are they going to, have a life that's anything like the previous generation. But I think as mental health providers, they weren't included in this study, but I would say we'd have to be up there between physicians and politicians perhaps, because we would be working with people who have mental health issues, and their lives are entrusted to our care a lot while we're helping them with that, their well-being certainly. So that could be pretty stressful for us and could lead to burnout eventually, especially if we don't have control over some of these things like hours and responsibility and all the piled up work. But I did bold here again the things that I think we do have control a little more over. And that is, we can reframe the way we look at having everything have to be perfect. And remember the quote from one of my colleagues, perfection is a direction, not a goal. If we're overachievers or we have a negative worldview, we can do some work on reframing that. Because, one thing good to do for burnout is just slow down, get support, and reevaluate our goals and priorities. There's a book called Keeping the Fire by Ruth Lubin, and she talks about the 3 R's: recognize, reverse, and resilience. So first, watch for the warning signs. And those are things like stomach ache, lack of concentration, emotional or physical, mental exhaustion, feeling like nothing's appreciated, feeling like you can't make a difference, and just being down about that. And then we can reverse it by undoing the damage through managing our stress and getting help. And then resilience, building our resilience to stress by taking care of our physical and emotional health. So are we bad people for feeling stress? For not taking care of ourselves well enough? No, it's not a fault to be judged. It's part of the human condition. It's really a natural response. If we don't recognize our stress, then we can't really deal with it. So it's a journey, and if we take the journey inward, then it will help us as we bring it back outward into our work. And really, the goal is to prevent it from happening, the stress and the burnout. I've read a book by Joan Borisenko, and I like her work. This was from long ago. And she talks about how the first yoga class she ever took, she worried about being relaxed enough, and everyone was lying on the floor and the instructor was going around. He would lift an arm and then drop it to see if the person was relaxed. And he lifted Joan's arm and it stuck up in the air like a dead canary and just stuck there. So that really made her laugh and helped her relax, because she realized, oh my goodness, I'm just really holding myself in a way that's really going to continue the stress. So she says peace is already within you, even if you're very busy. So in this era of COVID, I think that breathing is kind of a metaphor for keeping ourselves, taking care of ourselves. And self-care is what keeps us breathing most freely and most fully. So I'm going to do a really quick exercise in breathing just to show you, or just to give you a minute to relax. Now, this is one of the most simple ones I've ever found. Start by just relaxing, however you're sitting, or if you're lying down, or however you are, just let your body relax and kind of scan it from head to toe and let go of any tension. And breathe in for 2 seconds 1, 2, and then exhale for 4 seconds as if you're blowing through a straw. Count of 4. In with the count of 2. Out with the count of 4. Do it one more time. In, out. Now, that can be done at any time of the day if you're just feeling stressed, and can help you just let go of that tension. Just very healthy thing to do. You can do that anytime during the day. So here's a true or false question. So what do you think about this? Nothing has to change in the world for me to transform my own life experience. So it's kind of a human tendency to believe that things outside of ourselves have to change before our life experience will be good. But is this true? I think probably most of you understand that nothing has to change, but because a lot of what we feel in stress or negative things that are out there in the world bothering us, a lot of those can be changed in our own mind. So we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. That's the whole idea of projection, which I think a lot of you understand already. And I recommend this website called viacharacter.org. And you can learn about your own strengths there. You can learn your top like 3 to 5 strengths, and it's kind of interesting and helps you with your action items on self-care. For example, when I took this, I learned that my top strength was appreciation of beauty. And that kind of surprised me. But what I learned is that I could take a log and write down the beautiful things I see. And it's not just things or just birds or just scenery. It's also beautiful actions of other people. Well, sometimes you have to look a while to see those, but when you see that, it really is a beautiful thing to see. And another way you can do this is you could just get with a colleague and just sit together and or maybe on Zoom and list the strengths that you see or the traits that are positive that you see in each other and discuss them. Or both of you could take the viacharacter.org assessment and then talk about them. It's just a way of sharing and processing and learning what you can from it. If I focus on myself, I'm abandoning my mission. Well, this was, yeah, it's false. I see Lou shaking her head. She's right. Okay. It's okay to focus on yourself. Now, sometimes we deny that that's okay, but it's necessary and it's ethical. And if we put ourselves last or get stressed or burned out, then how will we have the energy to help other people? In our social work code of ethics, we have service, competence, and the importance of human relationships. And I'm sure that the other professions that are represented here have similar things like compassion, integrity, and service and human dignity. So we all have things within our code of ethics. So that it's really an ethical consideration too. If you have a hard time focusing on yourself, think about it this way. Again, this came from Joan Borisenko. Honor the precious person inside of you. And if you have trouble with that, imagine that you and your body are hosting someone like the Dalai Lama or Mother Teresa or your grandmother, somebody that you would never mistreat. Would you rush that person through lunch? Would you make her get out of the bathtub really quickly? Would you, if you treat yourself with that honor and respect that you would that other person, sometimes that helps you see it a little better. You will be more creative and more productive. And realize that you are worthy of that and be on your own team. And this last one, my happiness and success hinge on things outside of myself. That's not really true, is it? We can kind of ruin our experience in the present moment if we dwell on the future and keep thinking, well, when this happens, I'll be fine. Or worrying about something that happened in the past. It's really, we can change our experience for the better if we can avoid that focus. And another one of my colleagues who I believe is, I don't know, but I think here today, she says, we get good at what we practice. So if we can practice the in the moment piece, then we'll get a lot better at it. So can we do these things? Can we make a difference without suffering? Can we do meaningful work in a way that is good for us too? And I think that we need a high degree of consciousness and self-awareness. And we have to be able to ask ourselves some tough questions, like, is my commitment measured by my willingness to martyr myself? Well, no, if we're doing it in a healthy way, it doesn't need that. So the most important technique is what I was saying before, being fully present in our present moment, no matter how difficult. Slowing down, being mindful, and being curious. Curiosity is a great tool. If we're curious, we can watch our own processes, what's going on inside of ourselves, and we can observe other people too. And it's simple, but sometimes it's not easy to break habits that we have, habits of behavior. We have to have some patience with ourselves. Stewardship. Now, some of you are probably already very good at this. I doubt that you feel you're doing everything you can, but you know, we think about stewardship in regards to the environment and business and religiously, but what about yourself? You know, this is one of the most important things that you need to take care of, and you have more control over it than these other things. So living a sustainable life is a worthy goal. How do we remain professionally competent? So these are some of the things to keep in mind when you get to developing your own self-care plan, which we're going to do in a little while. One is awareness, like realizing that the line between distress and impairment might only be seen in hindsight, like in a rearview mirror. And also, it might be a gradual process and fall on a continuum. It might not just be black or white, yes or no. And we have blind spots. We talked about that earlier. So we need to enlist the help of colleagues. And also assessments can help, like the self-assessment that we'll be talking about soon. Knowing your personal warning signs and not ignoring them is another part of the awareness. And then in our actions, we need to incorporate what we know and attitudes and values to practice effectively. That's what the first bullet there is. And then we need to recognize and remediate problems before they progress to impairment. And then the last one, we really do need to remember to seek help and don't just go it alone. We like to feel like we're so independent and capable, but asking for help sometimes is a sign of strength. So what choices do we have? Now, this could be looked at more as a continuum rather than an either or. Of course, we'd all like to probably be in the left column, stay in touch with our heart and our emotions. Although sometimes that can feel worse because if we have to acknowledge pain, that might not be easy. Or we can be over here in the right column, building up walls to shield ourselves. So again, perfection is not the goal, but understanding your own values and allowing yourself to feel the emotions you have because they tell you something. Your emotions are important information. So if we understand our own values and structure our activities accordingly, then we'll be in a lot better shape. we can also decide, where to go and what to do. We can go places where we feel more comfortable. I actually had a situation today where I had to go to pick up some eyeglasses, and I walked in and I thought, uh-oh, something's wrong with this picture. The customers, there were two customers, and we both had masks on, and there were two employees, and they didn't have masks on. And here I was indoors, and they, were coming over with my glasses, and I said, wait a minute, aren't you using masks? And she says, oh, we will if someone asks us to. So I said, well, I'm asking. I would like you to use a mask. And so she did, and she was nice about it. And I thought, well, really, that was a choice, and that wasn't an overreaction. It was a reasonable request, and it worked out well. I felt good about it, but I was paying attention to my internal fear, but not overreacting and yelling at anybody. So I think it was probably a much better way than the way I reacted in the Starbucks a month and a half ago. So we often hear the idea that people want to be more in balance in their lives, maybe work-life balance. And being a juggler seems like a better way to go. He looks more centered than a tightrope walker, because he looks like he's sweating, and if he leans one way too far, he's going to fall off, and that won't be good. So I also heard another way to look at it. There was a woman, actually, I read a book called the A to Z Self-Care Handbook, which I found on the NASW website, but it's really got a lot of examples of things that people have been through. And this woman was going to school, and she had 3 children, and her husband died. And so she couldn't even handle juggling. All of a sudden, her world was shattered. She had so many things to do that she said, what I can do is I can decide on the important things and then proceed to take care of them. I can handle one child at a time. I can handle one assignment at a time, and just handle the most important thing so that I'm not feeling so completely scattered and torn apart. And that really got her through a hard time. So sometimes we have to decide consciously. And in her case, that's really what worked. We have to honor our priorities too. They might change throughout life. They might not be the same now as they were 10 years ago. So it's good for us to continue to take another look at that. So here is a tool for problem solving and also triaging. And it has to do with what can I control and what can I not control, and where can I get the most from my efforts. So in the upper left column, I have control and I take action. And in the lower right, I don't have control and I don't take action. Those are the two healthy corners, the upper left and the lower right. And then in the upper right, I don't have control, but I am acting. That is not healthy, because we're taking action and striving to get things accomplished, even though we don't have control. And the lower left, we are not acting, but we do have control, so we're being passive. And I'll show you in the next slide a little more detail here. This is a tool that I got actually from a social worker when my mom was ill and in her final years of life. And we had to go through the very stressful thing of placing her in assisted living, and she had dementia. So we were actually mostly operating in the upper right box where it says I don't have control, but I'm acting. We were doing so many things. We didn't want to let go of her hands-on care that we had been doing. Mostly my dad had been doing it, but we were all pitching in and helping. And we just felt terrible because we didn't feel like we were accomplishing anything. So we went to the social worker, and she helped us she helped us brainstorm, well, what things could you be doing and what do you need to let go of? Well, we let go, we put in the let go box the things that, like her hands-on care, because there were other people doing that. And what we took control of in the power box were things that we could actually keep doing, like spending time with her, one-on-one time, sitting with her, being with her, and like advocating for her with the nursing staff and making sure they knew she had a family who cared, and doing things that they wanted us to help with, like making a photograph album that they could refer to when they were working with her. So we were much relieved, and this was about 5 of us, my sister, my brother-in-law, my dad, and I, and we all kind of got rid of a lot of those things in the unhealthy boxes, and it was very helpful. In this next slide, here are some pandemic issues that you could apply to this control box. So I have control. I can focus on the positive whenever I can. I can be calm and careful, and I can be kind. I can say the things that are expressing my boundaries, like, yes, I would like you to get a mask. I can say it kindly. And I can protect my own energy. So all of these things that you see here, I can follow the guidelines. I can really keep myself pretty safe. Maybe I can't guarantee I'll always be safe, but I can do the best I can with what I can control. And then in the let go box, I can let go of other people's actions and behaviors. There's no way I'm going to change someone else's actions or behaviors or motives. I can't control the supplies at the stores, or this is the one that's the hardest of all, knowing what will happen. There's a lot of uncertainty, so I can let go of knowing what will happen. And that might give me back some energy if I'm not wasting a lot of time. My slides keep wanting to go on ahead. And so we'll talk about these less healthy boxes in the next slide. So in the lower left box, I have control, but I don't act. Here are some of the questions that you can ask to help you gain clarity and to help you move to a different box. So looking at the first one, feeling sad about not seeing people. So if I ask myself, what choices might there be? I had this situation, I was really feeling sad. My son was going to come at Easter with my granddaughters and his wife, and it was going to be a great time, and we really had it all planned. I had a golf cart rented, and they had to cancel because it was in April and the coronavirus changed everything. So we set up video calls, and we have those regularly once a month, and that it's not a replacement for that in-person time, but it's something that I do have control over. We can do things, say we're feeling bored with not much to do. So for that one, I ask these questions. Well, what choices might there be? That's really the best one for me. And I went through lots of childhood photos, made an album for my son, so I felt really good because I was doing something for him. And while I was doing that, I'd stop and look at some of my own childhood pictures. And that kind of made me remember that's actually something that's good to do when you're going through the process of making friends with yourself, like in the presentation that Lou did about now's the time to make friends with ourselves. I could study those pictures and remember some of the playful times as a child. And you know, when you put yourself in that position, then some of your worries kind of fade away. And the third one, no rules for personal safety in my workplace. Well, we learn a lot in social work about how to advocate when things aren't right, being proactive, helping set up the rules, again, managing up. If somebody isn't taking the reins and working on that, then we can help it happen. And in the upper right column, here are some questions to ask. If we find there's a lot of we're complaining about others' behavior, if we find ourselves doing that, then we need to ask the question, are we relieving stress or reinforcing stress in our complaining? Anyway, there's a whole list of questions here. Who could I talk to in getting clarity? Is my complaining really helping me, or is it making me feel worse? And here are a couple of other things. I bet none of you have seen political screeds in Facebook or Nextdoor. Sometimes those aren't very helpful. I just find that it's a really tough thing to witness even. And so if we're doing it, I guess we have to ask ourselves, is that following our own values? And how could I process that in a healthier way? And then here's one for at work. If I'm working very hard and I can't get everything done, what could you do about that? What steps could you take? You need to think that through, and some of these questions might be helpful. I could send this to you as a handout too later, the control box and some of the questions. And if you want to work on it yourself and use it to see how it goes, just think of one or two areas in your life or your work where you feel stressed or you feel stuck. And it doesn't have to be a big problem. And also, you might need to divide it down into smaller pieces. Think about how you've been dealing with it and which box you think you're in or a portion of it is in. And can you find aspects of it to let go of? And can you see where you're being passive? And can you take control and feel more powerful? This is another really good exercise to share with a colleague for listening or peer support. Just sharing it sometimes can make you feel more accountable for the changes that you'd like to make. Now we're coming to the self-care assessment, and I don't know how many of you got this ahead of time. I know Jean sent it out. And what it is it's a tool that begins to give you strategies to maintain your own care, self-care. The answers, there's no right or wrong answers. They're going to be different for everybody. And this is what it looks like, only I just picked 3 things out of it. These are 3 of the 5 categories: physical, psychological, and professional self-care. There's also a social category, and what's the other one? And a spiritual category. And so I just chose one in each, one question. And what you do is you rate, you put a check mark by 1 if you do it poorly, 2 if you do it okay, and 3 if you do it well. And you wait till later after it's all finished to do the starring. And then when it's all finished, you pick a few that don't have 3s that you might like to work on. So when I did this, I found a couple of things that I really wanted to work on. One was saying no, because I'm not really good at saying no. I like to take on lots of commitments. And so in my plan, then I put that I wanted to ask for help. But in our plans, you'll see later, it's better to be more specific. And then I also found an area of sleeping better was an area for improvement. But whatever you find for yourself, even if you have 20 things you'd like to improve, you really only want to pick 2 or 3. Otherwise, it can be overwhelming. And this is an ongoing thing. This is not something you do one shot, set aside on a shelf, and never come back to it. It's continuous improvement. You can revisit it at any time and pick something new that you'd like to work on. So Peter Drucker, back in the 50s, came up with these SMART goals, and probably most of you have heard of this before. So they need to be specific, because if you just say, for example, exercise, I'm going to exercise, that's not really going to make you accountable to do anything in particular. So you need to define clearly and precisely what you want to accomplish. It needs to be measurable so you can count it, measure it, and keep track of it. something that's attainable. So you want it to be possible to achieve, but not too easy. Maybe you want it to be something a little more challenging. It needs to be relevant to what direction you want to take in your life, and not something that's just for other people. And then time bound. So you want to have a deadline so that you have a little bit of a sense of urgency and you know when to celebrate. So what you would do with this is think about your strategies. Now, strategies, another way to say that is action steps. It's not that difficult to just come up with some ideas of ways that you can overcome that area. Like with the sleep, for me, the areas that I decided to do were listen to books on tape at night, books on a recording at night. If I woke up in the middle of the night, instead of getting up and wandering around and waking myself up too much, I did that. I also, maybe instead of having a glass of wine every night, I decided to just stop doing the wine, and that really helped. So there are things like that that can be very helpful. So if you develop some action steps, think about the barriers. What things would stop you from being successful? And then maybe share this with a friend or colleague. So you've got a whole list of things that if we knew how to do breakout rooms in Zoom, which we're going to be practicing soon, and I'm hoping that we can figure that out, then we could stop for a little bit here and you could take some time to talk it over with each other. And then when you do that, when you share with a colleague, there's a couple of rules to know about that are very helpful. One is you need to share the time, the air time, because it's really easy just to use up all the time on one person, and then the other person never gets a chance to talk. So say you have 20 minutes, 10 minutes each. The listener should not give advice, just listen. Maybe ask questions, open-ended questions for clarification, and don't give advice unless they want a suggestion. If they want a suggestion, then of course. Take turns, use your good listening skills. I know you're all good at that. You just don't want to, it's a safe space. You want to give each other a safe space and not coach or advise or fix, but allow the space to be there that will make it the easiest for that person to process. And the book I mentioned earlier is the A to Z Self-Care Handbook for Social Workers. You might find it interesting. I got it on Kindle, and they have an idea for every letter of the alphabet. I think it's a pretty good one. Maybe even better for people earlier in their careers or when they're still working. But now here's a form. Don't let this scare you. But in that book that I just showed you, they have a self-care planning form sample. And what I did was use it. It's just like a blank. Imagine this without any words in it except for the headings: care area, specific goal, and measure. So I just took the categories that are on this self-care assessment that you should have gotten by email, and I took each one and gave some examples of a specific goal. Okay, this is the kind of goal that's SMART. It's specific, measurable, and meets all the criterion of SMART. So instead of just exercise, you'd say walk 7,500 steps every day of the week. Well, maybe you want to say 10,000 steps 3 times a week, but whatever you want to do. And then in your accountability measure, you say how you're going to keep track of that. Well, maybe you have an iPhone and there's a health app. Maybe you have a Fitbit. The technology can help, or you can just keep a log. I wouldn't want to have to count those steps, but that's a possibility. Okay, wear a mask in public is recommended. That's just an example. You could keep a log of that. You could journal about it. So you need to think about how will you be accountable. And some of these I said colleague, like for psychological and emotional. Say you wanted to take that assessment that I talked about in the viacharacter.org website and discuss it with a colleague. Part of the accountability will be you'll find a colleague and you'll set up a time and you'll talk with each other. And another way you can process it is through journaling, and you might want to do both. So this is just a way to write down, and actually, you don't even need to pull it out and follow it so closely. I have found several times in my life that when I've done this kind of a plan, for example, David and I, when we first got together, my husband, we thought, gee, we should think about all the things that we want to do in life and see what compatibility we have with all of our various goals. Well, we did this. We made a spreadsheet. I think some of my friends will laugh about this. And we had it all written out, and we had some things that were joint and some things that were individual. And we looked back about 6 months to a year later, and we had accomplished so many things on that spreadsheet without even really referring to it, because we planted it in our brain. Like one of mine was, I've got to see my parents twice a year. They're getting older. I really need to see them as often as possible. And I just started planning those trips to Idaho from Seattle. So it's really a good way to do it. Once you write it down, it keeps you a little more accountable. So these are just examples of ways you can do it and how you can keep track. Some of them just say calendar. Well, if you're going to talk to 2 friends a week that you want to laugh, that you know will laugh with you, I love this one. This is my favorite social and emotional goal. I can just put that on my calendar. Who am I going to call? And not be afraid to be the initiator. So these are fun. All right. We're coming to the end of the main part of the presentation. So I want to give you some tips, and then we're going to have a question and answer period. So the tips, number 1, taking stock. So as I mentioned before, it's not a static thing, it's continuous. And you can study yourself like you were a scientific experiment. You're the subject. One size does not fit all. You can check in with yourself to take stock. You can do that in a pretty easy way. You can, on a scale from 1 to 10, how well do I feel versus how empty do I feel? 10 is I feel well, completely well. And 1 is I feel empty. And decide, where is it that I should worry about it? And the person who came up with this was Francis Mathieu. He's a Canadian, and he studies compassion fatigue. And he said that 7 was kind of his breaking point, where he wants to be 7 or above. And if not, then he's really going to pay attention and bring some of his plan into play. So you can do that. He does it as many times as 3 times a day, or maybe you could do it once a week, whatever makes sense to you. And then number 2, starting a self-care idea collection. I really recommend getting a pretty journal, or just get a journal at the grocery store that's inexpensive, whatever you like. But write in that journal all the ideas that you can come up with. You could do a search on the internet, self-care ideas. And some of them should be immediate, and some of them may be more long-term. Like immediate ones can be taking a walk, adjusting your breathing, having fun, talking to a friend, and others can be much more long-term. And number 3, finding time for yourself every day. How hard is that? But sometimes I find myself not even sitting out on my lanai for a whole day. So one of my things that I tell myself now that I'm doing every day is spend at least 15 minutes sitting out on the lanai. I think that this need was highlighted to me by a neighbor. I had a next door neighbor who was a caregiver. So she's one of the people who's at really high risk of having problems. In fact, I heard the statistic. I've heard it different ways. It's somewhere between 40 and 65% of caregivers actually die before the person that they're taking care of. And this neighbor used to say to me, I love to play the piano. I just never have time anymore. And I love to swim, but I just don't have time to do it. And then she actually had a heart attack with no condition that anyone knew about and passed away right away. So that was a really sad situation. Well, I really feel that it's important to don't put yourself last. Rebalance your activities if you find yourself not taking care of yourself. Number 4, learn to ask for help at home and at work. That's kind of an obvious one. And if you're working, have a transition time. Sometimes people just need a few minutes to breathe, relax before getting into processing the whole day with their partner. I like number 5, learn to say yes or no more often. Which is it you need to learn to say more often? Is it yes or is it no? For me, I found it was no, but for some people, it's hard to say yes. So just try it, just stretch a little and try it. And number 6, say I choose. Now, here's where you can feel more in control of things, partly because of the way you're saying it in your own mind. Rather than saying I should, I ought to, oh, I ought to go out on the lanai. Or I choose to spend a little time every day on the lanai. Those are 2 completely different mindsets. So use the control box. Remember those 4 A's if you feel stressed. Avoid, alter, adapt, or accept. And the 3 R's for burnout: recognize, reverse, build resilience. And then assess your trauma inputs. Learn more about compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. There's a lot of information out there about this, and ways that you can pay attention to yourself if you might be getting too much of that. Not going to cover that much more here. I don't know how many people are working and subject to that at this time. Recognize the difference between complaining that relieves stress and complaining that reinforces stress. Do we all probably know somebody who complains a lot? Hopefully it's not we ourselves, but trying to target that into something that relieves the stress and then moving forward is really a healthier way to go. And then take care of your body, your mind, and your spirit. That involves exercise, healthy eating. If weight gain is part of your stress, there are great books and great articles, and there's a Way to Go group that we have that helps with cognitive behavioral therapy. And remember, choose activities that make you feel joyful. The things that really help you. Like one of mine is laughing with other people. I just find that to be so important. Start small. You don't have to start by looking for your capital P purpose in life. You can find a few ways to incrementally improve your experience. And use common sense. Take breaks. Pay attention to your body. And don't spend too much time with electronic devices. That was another thing that I learned when I was trying to sleep better was if I didn't get up and sit and look at an iPad, which would wake up my brain way too much, then that helped a lot. All right, I think we are ready to move into, I'll say my little quote here and then we'll move to the next slide. Dig where the ground is soft. That's the idea of starting small with some of the easier things and then get a feel for it, and then maybe you can get a little more challenging with your plan. So it's time for questions. If anybody has questions or comments, anything you'd like to say. The final tips: be mindful, slow down before you rush in to help. Use curiosity and cultivate patience. Be compassionate and gentle towards yourself. Open your heart and your mind and laugh. Do journaling or meditating I say start a gratitude practice. That sounds huge, but it's really not as huge if you just say every day something you're grateful for, or write down 3 things each day that you're grateful for, because even in these tough times, there are things we can feel grateful for. So that is, I think, the last slide, except for the review. So remember, it's not a weakness to pay attention to yourself, it's a necessity. And number 2, we have choices. Remember the juggling and the tightrope, and then the idea that you can choose the most important thing and go forward with that. Use the models of the control box for problem solving. And number 4, the assessment that you took. I hope you'll carry that out and complete it and see what you can do, and then process it with somebody if possible. Again, this was brought to you by TLC Services, and we have a website that has a lot of information on it, including it has a YouTube button where you can see our previous presentations that have been made into videos. There's some really pertinent ones to some of the topics we talked about today, including if you're isolated or anxious, you're normal, making friends with yourself. There's lots of really good videos there to check out. And here's an email address. If you have any questions or need to follow up with anything on today, this info@tlc-services.org. I will get that and send it to the right place. And there's a phone number there for Pat, 352-322-0576.
Bonnie?
Yes.
May I add something also?
Please.
For those of you who are still seeing clients, whether remotely or eventually, sending them to the TLC website to look at some of these videos can really enhance the work you're doing together. I have found that many of my clients have gone to the website and then brought back their experience with having viewed 1 or 2 of the videos. And so since we can't be one-on-one with people, it kind of keeps us present in between sessions. So make sure that you utilize that as you find necessary.
Oh yes, and we're getting lots of viewings of those videos, which we're very happy about. It makes us feel like we're not stopping everything we were doing because of the COVID. We are able to continue our work, which is very satisfying. So thank you all so much for being here today.